Now, for better or worse, sequels are the lifeblood that keeps Hollywood afloat, and no genre loves a sequel more than horror. But what with the huge turnover for horror content every single month, a fair few horror sequels slip through the cracks that you might not even know about. So let's take a look at them today. So I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 horror movie sequels you had no idea were just released. Number 10, Puppet Master Dr. Death. If you're much of a horror fan, you've probably at least heard of the Puppet Master franchise, as began with 1989's eponymous direct-to-video entry. Despite scoring mixed reviews, the first Puppet Master was a commercial success on VHS and quickly amassed a cult following, which allowed producer Charles Band to spin it off into a franchise under his Full Moon Pictures production label. And if you were old enough to be a conscious human being in the early 1990s, you might recall seeing copies of the first few Puppet Master sequels in your local video rental store. But by the turn of the century, the franchise's popularity had certainly waned. Yet Band has continued to produce Puppet Master sequels and spin-offs to this day of wildly varying quality, with the 15th film in the series, Puppet Master Dr. Death, being quietly released this past October. The trailers made it clear that the production values are not great, but there's nevertheless a kitschy charm to the murderous puppetry that's apparently kept the die-hard fans returning for each and every new volume. Number 9, SADAKO DX. The legendary J-horror series Ringu launched in 1998 and quickly became a global phenomenon, surely aided by the success of the Naomi Watts starring Hollywood remake. And though you might be aware that a number of Japanese sequels were quickly produced in the years following the original, did you have any earthly idea that it is still chugging along? Earlier last year, the 8th entry into the series, SADAKO DX, was released in Japan, taking place in the present day where the iconic Ring video has become a viral sensation. The filmmakers opted to take this series into a more comedic meta direction, and that's meant that it's received mixed reviews from critics and fans alike. All the same, unless you're supremely dialed into the wildly convoluted lore of the Ringu series, you probably didn't even know that it was still going. Given that the series keeps limping along despite performing poorly at the box office, a 9th film will probably materialize within a couple of years. Number 8, The REEF, Stalked. It's fair to say that nobody expected a sequel to 2010's shark movie The Reef, which despite receiving decent reviews, reclaimed only a fraction of its $3.8 million budget during its limited theatrical release. Yet the film presumably posted gangbusters numbers on home video then, given that the writer-director of the project was able to finally produce his long-gestating sequel The Reef Stalked, which was released back last July. You barely know it given the film's near non-existent marketing campaign, but considering that even those who enjoyed the 2010 film likely don't remember it all that well 12 years later, can you really blame the distributor? A spiritual sequel focused on a new cast of characters facing off against another bloodthirsty Great White, Stalked nevertheless launched to not bad reviews and actually managed to gross around $1.3 million from its Russian theatrical release. When you add in that it was picked up by popular horror streamer Shudder, don't be shocked if The Reef Stalked actually turns out to be a modest financial success like its predecessor. And so that means that The Reef 3 could actually theoretically show up totally out of nowhere a few years from now. Number 7, Bring It On, Cheer or Die. Bring It On, Cheer or Die is an especially interesting case given that Bring It On isn't typically regarded as a horror series. The cheerleading comedy franchise is of course best remembered for the Kirsten Dunst starring 2000 original, and by 2017, 5 direct-to-video sequels had come and gone without making much of a dent. But you really had to keep your eyes peeled to spot the latest 7th film, which was quietly dumped onto video on demand before Halloween. A truly baffling detour into horror territory for the franchise, because now the group of cheerleaders are being picked off by a mysterious killer. On paper, there was actually some potential here. A high school satire that delivered gory kills and featured cheerleaders using their acrobatic skills to defend themselves could have actually been a ton of fun. Could have, that is. Yet despite the intriguing weirdness of the genre shift, Bring It On, Cheer or Die is the worst thing yet produced by the IP. Blandly written, filmed and acted, complete with largely bloodless PG-13 death scenes. It's one of those mesmerizingly awful sequels whose intent is completely bewildering, pleasing neither horror fans nor those who actually enjoyed the mainline series. You have to ask yourself, who the hell was this for? Number 6, Scare Package 2, Rad Chad's Revenge. Now, horror anthologies are totally thriving on streaming, and Scare Package was released on Shudder to solid reviews in the summer of 2020. It seemingly performed well enough for the streamer to greenlight a sequel, and released it just in time for Christmas. So now we have Scare Package 2, Rad Chad's Revenge. The trailer certainly hypes up another riotously over-the-top collection of horror shorts, yet unless you're following Shudder on Twitter, you'd barely even know the movie was out. It perhaps speaks to the general struggle of streaming services to promote the bevy of content that they release on a weekly, even daily basis. But considering that Scare Package became quite the cult hit in the horror community during an especially fraught period of the pandemic, it's surprising that more of a fuss hasn't been made about the sequel, which to date has received even better reviews than the first. So yeah, go check it out. Number 5. All of the Amityville movies. Because the mythic Amityville hauntings are based on a real series of murders, there's been nothing stopping enterprising filmmakers from churning out low-effort sequels and spin-offs bearing the Amityville name in order to make a quick buck. Since 2011, a number of low-budget production companies have been creating new Amityville films on a basically annual basis, and in recent years it's apparently proven financially successful enough for numerous Amityville films to even be released within the same year. And last year represented a ludicrous peak of these weird air quotes sequels, with an insane 9 films hitting Blu-ray shelves and video-on-demand platforms inside of the calendar year. The more eyebrow-raising offerings include Amityville Scarecrow, Amityville Gas Chamber, Amityville in the Hood, Amityville Karen, Amityville Thanksgiving, and Amityville in Space. Okay? It goes without saying that there isn't any shared continuity between any of these films, all of which have such a low public profile that few critics have even bothered to review them. How they're able to turn a profit despite having such limited visibility, even with their microscopic budgets, is anyone's guess. For legal reasons, we can't call it a money laundering scheme, but would that really surprise anyone at this point if that was true? Number 4. The Blackwell Ghost 6 and 7. Found footage film The Blackwell Ghost was released back in 2017 and centered around a filmmaker, played by director Turner Clay himself, who attempts to prove that ghosts exist. It became something of a cult hit in horror fandom due to both the perceived realism of the found footage and Clay's imaginative use of an evidently tiny budget. As a result, it proved successful enough for Clay to spin his 59-minute experiment into an actual franchise in its own right. Clay has worked industriously on the series ever since, enough so that last year he released 2 sequels, The Blackwell Ghost 6 and 7. But given that Clay releases his films direct to Amazon and seemingly covers all promotion himself, you couldn't really be blamed for having no idea that The Blackwell Ghost was actually a thing beyond its original 2017 release. While prominent critics have generally avoided reviewing the franchise as a whole, the audience reception across the sequels has remained impressively consistent, especially given that Clay is averaging more than a movie a year now. It'll certainly be interesting to see how long he can keep the series going before the law of diminishing returns finally kicks in, but given his talent and commitment while working on a microscopic budget, it's very easy to root for him. Go Clay! Number 3. Wormwood Apocalypse. 2014's Aussie zombie film Wormwood Road of the Dead wasn't a huge commercial hit by any means, but following a successful run on the genre film festival circuit, it became a modest success on home video. Though the director confirmed that a sequel was in development the very next year, the lack of forward momentum in the years that followed seemed to suggest that it would sadly never come to fruition. And unless you were actively following the director online, you could have easily missed the sequel Wormwood Apocalypse, which required funding in late 2020, was shot in 2021, had a small festival run later that year, and then landed on streaming earlier in 2022. Despite understandable concerns that it might have all been too little too late, the sequel has been about as well received as the first, with much praise going for the energetic direction and the performances of the cast, even if it really is more of the same Mad Max but with zombie shtick. Yet because our attention is pulled in so many different directions online these days, even fans of the original couldn't be faulted for having no idea that this movie had finally been filmed, let alone released. Number 2. Jeepers Creepers Reborn. You couldn't really be blamed for having no idea that the 3rd or 4th Jeepers Creepers movies even exist, given that the series hasn't had a major theatrical release since Jeepers Creepers 2 way back in 2003. The 3rd film came and went with a blip in 2017, and after a lengthy stay in post-production limbo due to a rights lawsuit, Jeepers Creepers Reborn finally slithered into select cinemas this past September. The 4th Jeepers Creepers was technically less of a sequel than an outright franchise reboot, attempting to kickstart a new trilogy of films once again centered around the Creeper, while free of the problematic franchise creator Victor Salva. But between its paltry theatrical release and low-key video-on-demand bow, it rather feels like distributor Screen Media Films is a little embarrassed of what they've wrought upon the world. In fact, there's a fair chance that you've only heard of it because of its impressively awful 0% score on Rotten Tomatoes, ensuring that it's not merely the worst horror sequel of the entire year, but one of the worst in any year. Yet, given Reborn's evidently tiny production budget, its $5.9 million box office haul and video-on-demand revenues are probably enough to make Jeepers Creepers 5 a commercial reality. The horror the actual horror. And number 1, Titanic 666. Schlock Factory The Asylum are still busy peddling their production line of awful mockbusters, though Titanic 666 probably isn't quite what you're expecting. No, it's not a low-budget supernaturally themed riff of James Cameron's Titanic, but rather a belated sequel to The Asylum's original Cameron knockoff, 2010's Titanic 2. Titanic 2 was a straight-up disaster flick, and a mightily terrible one at that, in which a replica of the original Titanic vessel attempted to repeat its voyage in reverse, only for disaster to strike once again. The film was a viral hit in 2010, and that just seemed to be the end of it, but Asylum co-founder David Michael Latt ultimately decided to dust off the IP for another go-around with this 12 years later horror-themed sequel. This insane trailer for the project shows the Titanic 3 being assailed by demonic forces and an iceberg, because why the hell not at this point? Unsurprisingly, the few reviews out there in the world have been utterly scathing, but what did bad press ever do to stop the Asylum from doing anything? And there we go, my friends. Those were 10 horror movie sequels you had no idea were just released. I hope that you enjoyed that, and please let me know what you thought about it down in the comments section below. As always, I've been Jules. You can go follow me over on Instagram, where it's @RetroJ, but the O is a 0. And you can check out all my Warhammer paintings that I've been doing. Yes, I am a nerd. But before I go, I just want to say one thing. I hope you're treating yourself well with love and respect, my friend. At the time of recording this, it is the beginning of the year, and it's going to take a lot of energy to get into the right mindset to approach this new year with positivity and a good attitude. And at the end of the day, I just want you to live a happy life. So remember, treat yourself with love and respect. You deserve the best things in life, and nobody has the right to tell you otherwise, all right? Now let's get out there and smash 2023 together. As always, I've been Jules. You have been awesome. Never forget that, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.